Desperate and trembling, a young boy said the accusation was false and that he hadn't done anything. However, the old man declared that the accused had no right to speak to him. At that moment, he ordered the guards to take the boy away, but the boy continued to cry out that he had been framed. Still filled with desperation, he screamed, begging them not to ruin his life. This is the city of Katarov, where our main character was born and raised. It's famous for its S-rank dungeon, known as the Katarov dungeon. This is why many adventurers come to the city to conquer the dungeon, keeping the place constantly bustling. So, in this very place, our main character was just a farmer. As he stared intently ahead, he realized that the fields were being destroyed. Suddenly, a man named Darga appeared on the scene. As the son of the city's mayor, he approached with a strange smile. The bully said that his father told him the main character's annual contribution was too low. The boy grew anxious again. He realized these were the very people who had destroyed his fields. Being told that he was, in fact, an alks, he bowed his head and apologized to the bullies. People with pale silver hair like him were called alks, and in this story, they are the subject of persecution. It's rumored that once the alks betrayed humanity and aided the demons, even though they beat him, even though they destroyed his fields for no reason. Sadly, the boy's only choice was to endure it all. After the beating, he returned to the city center. A girl appeared before him saying that Darga and his friends had beaten him up again. This girl was Namia, who said she would take care of him. Namia was the daughter of a neighboring farmer, and also his only friend in the city. After she finished bandaging his wounds, the main character thanked her, and the girl worriedly asked why they kept harassing him. With a sad expression, he said there was nothing he could do and blamed his silver hair. A little shyly, his friend explained that she actually liked his hair color. At this moment, the boy thought of his silver hair as a curse. But Namia always said things like that. Changing the subject, she caught Kiska's attention, announcing that she was going to marry Darga. This news completely shocked the main character, leaving him silent and forcing a smile. He said that he understood and congratulated her. Hearing this, the girl also felt surprised and a bit awkward. She asked Kiska if that was really okay with him. After that, she asked him if he planned on staying in the city forever, and he replied that it would probably cause trouble. She warned him that she didn't like the villagers arguing with him, and that if he stayed here, he could die. Embarrassed, he said there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, the girl grabbed his hand, looking scared as she said that they should run away from this city together. This new revelation caught the main character completely by surprise. She explained that she had money at home, and with it, they could find a place to live together where no one would know them. He asked her if she really wanted to do that, and she confirmed that she did. She didn't want to marry that man. After that, the blonde-haired boy came closer. He kissed her and told her that he loved her, and she replied that she loved him too. That night in the village, he was carrying a sack on his back, smiling because he knew that tonight, he and Namia would leave the city of Katarov. He was filled with excitement. He thought that with Namia, he would forget the terrible days he'd spent in this city. However, as he was walking to her house, he suddenly heard her scream. Yelling for them to stop, he recognized her voice and rushed into the house. Desperate, he ran to her room, calling out her name. When he opened the door, he saw her on the bed with the 3 bullies. The only thing the main character could say was her name. Annoyed, Darga called him alks. Confused, Kiska asked what was going on. The bully then remarked that it was obvious if he just looked. Kiska saw his girl turn away completely. Kiska then ordered the bullies to leave now. Furious, Kiska punched the bully in the face and yelled at him to get away from her. This only made Darga even more angry. And then Darga punched Kiska in the stomach. He moved to finish Kiska off with a knee strike, slamming it right into Kiska's face. Then all of them jumped him, and they started beating him. In the background, Namia begged them to stop, and one of the men asked Kiska what he wanted. Darga declared that Namia was his wife. Darga then looked at one of his friends, who suddenly had an idea. One of the bullies shoved the boy against a wall while the other grabbed his arms. In a surprisingly gentle way, they began to pull at his fingernails. And then, with utter cruelty, he ripped Kiska's fingernail off. As an intense pain shot through him, Kiska screamed in agony. The bully smiled, said, "Again," and they continued to torture the boy. But Namia stepped in, telling them to stop. She declared that she would tell them everything. She begged them to stop this. Desperately, the hero told Namia to stop, but then the bully punched Kiska in the face. He asked who gave Kiska permission to speak. Kiska looked at his friend. He pleaded with her not to say another word. The bullies continued to beat Kiska, and Kiska's consciousness began to fade. When Namia had told them everything, Darga trembled with rage. Namia began to cry. Furious, Darga grabbed the girl by the throat, all while her eyes were fixed on her friend, Kiska. Kiska's eyes then began to close. The next day in the village, word spread that Kiska had taken advantage of Namia's parents being away, broken into her house, and killed her. His sentence was exile to the S-class dungeon. Kiska was devastated. He remembered clearly that Darga had killed Namia in a fit of rage after hearing the truth. But in the end, the blame for these crimes fell upon him. At that moment, the old man asked the boy if he had any last words. The boy insisted on his innocence, over and over again. However, this was all part of the false testimony given by Darga and his friends. Furthermore, the village chief, who was the bully's father, quickly silenced everyone. With no other choice, the old man announced he would carry out the sentence, but that he would show a small bit of mercy. The old man ordered the guards to cut the ropes binding the boy's hands. Darga scoffed at the situation, saying it wouldn't change anything, and that the boy would die either way. The blonde boy thought that Darga might be right, and that it didn't matter anyway, since he wouldn't survive. Just then, the old man ordered the guards to proceed, and they pushed the boy. He ended up on a drawing that looked like a magic circle. The circle glowed endlessly, and he started to cry. Kiska declared that he hated them. Kiska hated Darga, the friends who killed Namiya, and the village leaders, the ones who made false accusations without hearing a single word from him. As he cried, he kept saying that he hated all of them. A moment later, the main character woke up. He was actually in a dungeon. Terrified, he wondered if this was an S-rank dungeon, the one called the Katarov dungeon. Just then, he started to hear a roar. When he looked closer, he noticed something was coming. It was an A-rank armored bear. Seeing it advance toward him, the boy was completely terrified, trembling. He remembered hearing adventurers talk about it, a monster that, if you saw it, meant you were as good as dead. Terrified, he started to run from the monster, but the bear was very fast, and it quickly caught up to him. It tried to attack the boy but missed, smashing the ground instead. As he kept running, he said he was going to die. He couldn't take it anymore and started to scream for help. A shadow appeared. The shadow asked if he truly wanted to be helped right now. He was so terrified. He started to say yes and meekly begged for help. That shadow vanished, and in its place a girl appeared. She held out her hand and told the main character that she would grant him an ability. At that moment, a notification appeared, indicating that the ability Save and Reset had been acquired. After that, the figure vanished. Kiska wondered what this ability could do against the armored bear, and also how to even use it. However, not caring about any of that, the bear continued to advance on him. This time, it landed a powerful punch right in the boy's face. The punch was so strong the boy went flying, and with just that one punch, the boy was dead. However, a moment later, he got up in a panic. He realized he wasn't actually dead. He looked at his hands. He said to himself that he had died and wondered why he was still alive. As he tried to understand what had just happened, the armored bear appeared behind him. The monster seemed angry with its target. Without hesitation, it landed another punch to his face. With this punch, the main character died once again. He woke up in terror, and then he stood up, realizing he had revived again. He was certain the armored bear had killed him before. Once again, the bear appeared behind him, and the bear threw another punch, killing him once more. Now he was dead in the exact same way. For the third time in a row, this loop continued. He began to understand that in reality, every time he died, he would go back in time. This happened thanks to the Save and Reset ability that the girl had granted him. He wondered if he would be stuck in this death loop for the rest of his miserable life. He woke up for the 5th or 6th time, thinking he would just die again. But this time, he thought faster and started to run. However, even if you managed to escape the bear, you'd still meet the same tragic end as before. You'd die at the bear's hands. He would die whether he dodged left or right, up or down, no matter how many times. In the end, he just kept on dying every single time. In despair, he declared that he didn't want this and begged for someone to just kill him. Because if you could just die, you would be freed from this pain. However, your plea went unanswered, and you woke up once again. Afterward, you thought about the possibility of deleting your Save and Reset ability to free yourself from this. At that moment, a screen displaying your abilities opened up. You can interact with everything on the screen, so you should be able to delete the Save and Reset ability. However, something caught your attention. The moment you touched the status window, memories flooded your mind. Memories of Namiya's assassins Darga, and the villagers who framed you. Your rage was overwhelming, and you wondered how it could have just vanished so easily. You concluded that anger would obviously disappear, and so you charged at the bear to counterattack. Knowing what the bear would do, you dodged the first punch just in time. In that moment, you realized you had moved toward the bear and grabbed it. However, if you dodged the first punch, the second punch would hit you. And so you died once again. But this time, you felt a surge of joy for having dodged that first punch. You weren't sure how many times you had died. It was probably over 100 times by now. You had memorized the bear's movements, knowing it would use its right arm first. So you ducked and moved forward. Then the bear used its left arm, and you stood up and leaped in for an attack. To dodge the blow, you took a step and then rolled to the left, which allowed you to get behind the bear. However, you couldn't panic and try to run away because the monster would catch up and kill you if you did. Focusing on defeating it, you dodged another punch. You told yourself that this was the best approach you had found. after dying countless times. And just like that, you landed a punch right in the monster's face. However, your punch was pretty weak. He knew he had 25 seconds to run before the bear would catch him. After running for a while, he stopped and noticed chests strewn about the dungeon. Just then, he heard the bear chasing after him, so he continued running through areas he had never explored in his previous lives. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet collapsed, and he fell into a trap, finally dying in a new way. This had taken at least 200 attempts. After fighting the bear many more times, his movements had improved drastically. Now, the hero could aim for the bear's eyes, giving him 35 seconds to escape instead of 25. While running, he remembered the trap he'd fallen into before, and realized this was the only path with no way out. He saw the bear closing in. Unable to stand repeating this scene again, he decided to take a powerful leap, avoiding all the spikes on the ground. He breathed a sigh of relief, having narrowly escaped. Then he looked up and laughed at the enraged bear, remembering how many times he had died, just so he could get past this point. He entered a small tunnel ahead, looked forward and saw a light. When he reached the end of the tunnel, he was completely astonished. It was a room with a chest in the center. It looked like a secret or rare chest. Upon opening the chest, he discovered a gem inside. He collected the item and found out it was the wisdom core, which activated automatically. A long list of abilities appeared before him, from S rank to C rank. Looking at the list, he was awestruck by the amazing abilities. He could choose any one of them, but there were just too many options. At this moment, he began to wonder which one he should choose. He decided not to choose healing magic or fire magic, since both required mana generation. Right now, he was short on mana, and as for swordsmanship and archery skills, there was no reason for him to choose them without the corresponding weapons. As expected, he should choose an S-rank ability. In this case, the acceleration ability could help him climb higher, but the stealth ability could increase his chances of survival. He was a little anxious, so he decided to choose the stealth ability. When the stealth ability was activated, his body was covered in a layer of this magic, and he felt a thrill of excitement. However, just then, he realized the entrance was closing. On top of that, several magic circles, pentagrams in the area began to glow. Suddenly, a whole swarm of bears, just like the first one, appeared. Judging by their expressions, these bears didn't seem friendly. They all started to get restless and growl. Seeing such a large number of enemies, the boy felt worried. He told himself that this was where the real challenge began, or he would die. With countless bears in this treasure room, he was ultimately killed by a total of 10 bears. After that, he started over, and realized he was back at the very first checkpoint. Even so, he managed to reach the treasure room once again. After opening the chest, the list of skills appeared before his eyes. He worried about which skill to choose, and he decided to use acceleration. He charged toward the bears, but thanks to his speed, he dodged their attacks. This was because he could see the bears moving in slow motion after 200 deaths. He had eventually acquired the stealth ability, but it had no effect on these bears. So he decided to choose acceleration. Once again, he charged at a bear. He landed a precise punch. He was overjoyed that he had finally succeeded. However, when he looked at his hand, he saw that it was completely broken. He was distracted by this. All the bears took the opportunity to attack him. As he was being beaten, he thought that his body was still too weak to handle the power of acceleration. After being defeated by 10 bears once more, he woke up and looked ahead. He saw the same bear from before and realized he was here again. However, he was more experienced now. If acceleration helped him dodge the bear's attacks, he would have more opportunities to attack. He decided to choose the acceleration ability again and try to clear the room, but he got distracted and died yet again. The total death count had reached around 225. When he reached the treasure room, he realized just how difficult it was to get in, and every attempt to get used to it just added to his list of deaths. After choosing one of the abilities, monsters appeared, and they rushed towards him. He used the acceleration skill to engage in combat, but he immediately realized 3 bears were attacking him simultaneously. As he wondered why it was happening this way, the current attempt count was around 300. The bears had killed him many times since he'd chosen acceleration and continued to fight. He then managed to use his speed to blind them, but they endured the pain and attacked him again. Eventually, Kiska got behind them and began to choke each bear one by one. However, there was one thing he was afraid to admit. Even with an S-rank ability, he still couldn't defeat these bears. Even though he had acceleration, he couldn't win against them, and that was the conclusion he reached after 300 deaths, lying motionless on the ground. He understood that he had to start all over again. Sometime later, he was back in the treasure room. Kiska knew that choosing an ability wasn't easy, because if he died, he'd have to face the first bear all over again. And if he did nothing, he'd die anyway. He faced his inevitable fate, concluding that there was no way out. Then he remembered Namia, but in his memory, Darga also appeared, the one who had killed her. Recalling everything he had been through in his first life, Kiska's expression changed. He declared that he hated that man, and if it weren't for that hatred, he would have given up long ago. After he chose one of the abilities, he swore he would escape this terrible dungeon and get his revenge with his own hands. After he selected an ability, the bears appeared before him. He no longer feared death. Kiska charged at them, using his martial arts, physical enhancement, and body improvement abilities one after another. He kept searching for a way to defeat the bears. Kiska died countless times until his death count reached 420. During one of his attempts, I'm standing on the back of a bear, and I think this muscle boost ability is definitely the best one. Suddenly, the bear went berserk. Kiska immediately let go. Kiska did a backflip, and he rushed towards another bear. He declared that this was his target. He kicked it hard in the head. The monster fell to the ground unconscious. The monster's death was confirmed, and skill points were acquired. The boy smiled, feeling ecstatic, because this was the first bear he had ever killed. You currently have 12 available points. The first ability is Save and Reset, and the second is Muscle Boost. To upgrade the second ability, you need 10 points. Kiska knew what he had to do. He decided to upgrade Muscle Boost to level 2. He thought that if he kept killing bears and upgrading his strength, one day he would be able to defeat them all and continue to improve his Muscle Boost ability. He needed 100 points to upgrade the ability. Realizing this, the boy understood that each bear he killed would grant him 12 points. So he would need to kill a lot of bears to reach 100 points. Feeling discouraged, he declared that this was truly impossible, and if he couldn't upgrade, then he wouldn't be able to defeat them all either. Time passed, and he had died 510 times. In his despair, he wondered why he had to go through this. This was all Darga's fault, and it's because of him that I'm trapped in this horrible dungeon. Unintentionally, the boy activated the taunt skill. He muttered to himself that he had no idea how to use this skill, and that he was about to die again and would have to start all over. He turned to look, and noticed the bears were heading towards him. He analyzed the situation and realized the only thing he could do was taunt his opponents. He hesitantly called them a bunch of idiots. Then he wondered if this was actually how the skill was supposed to work. At that moment, a bear charged into the wall. He looked at another bear and called it ugly. The bear was provoked, and the insulted creature attacked one of its own. These actions took the boy by surprise. As he watched the two bears get taken down right in front of him, the boy started to laugh, and then he laughed like a madman. He wondered if all his efforts had been for nothing, even though he, the main character, was filled with rage. So he decided that from now on, he would use the skill to kill every last one of them. The bears surrounded him, taunting their opponent. He beckoned them closer, calling them little fishies. All the bears started fighting one another. Meanwhile, he kept insulting them, calling them stupid and idiots. A while later, nearly all of them had been wiped out. He noticed there were 2 bears left, looking pretty angry. He told them to attack him at the same time, calling them slowpokes. They obeyed and charged right at him, but he dodged just in time. The 2 bears ended up crashing into each other. Because the armored bears were so powerful, both of them died from that single blow. The boy, now covered in blood, threw his hands in the air and celebrated, shouting that he'd done it. The death count was 510, and that was how he finally cleared the armored bear room. Sometime later, when he'd entered another area of the dungeon, the boy was running. After clearing the room with the 10 armored bears, a headless fire horse appeared at the exit. The boy panicked. He managed to hide just in time, thinking he'd made it to a new level. But it wasn't over. This monster had already killed him 10 times. When the boy went out to face the headless horse, the good news was that his respawn point had updated to the treasure room. He figured that just not having to deal with those bears anymore made everything much easier. After escaping the headless horse, he started wandering through the dungeon, and he realized this was a place he had never been to before. Ahead, he saw a room. Inside that mysterious room, there were teleportation circles. He saw 3 circles in the room. He wondered if he had to choose one of them. He was worried. Then he told himself there was no need to worry about it. He quickly chose the circle in the middle. He smiled, thinking that if he regretted it, he could just die and come back. A moment later, he was transported to another area of the dungeon. He looked around, wondering if there was anything here, but for now he decided to keep moving. As he wandered through the dungeon, he happened to discover a room. As he got closer, he realized what it was. It was the woman, the one who had given him the ability to revive. She seemed to be trapped in a strange laboratory. He moved closer, and Kiska realized it was really her. He wondered if she was being held captive. He panicked and reached his hand toward the case containing her. The moment his finger touched it, the glass shattered to his shock. He wondered if he had really broken the glass with just a touch. Immediately, the girl fell to the ground. He worried about the girl and asked if she was okay. The girl was confused. She stood up and replied that she was fine. With a fake smile, she asked if he was the one who had freed her. But he just asked if she was the one who had given him this ability. The girl introduced herself, saying her name was Agaya Tsubaki, a heroine who had been sealed in this place. The girl asked for his name, and he replied that his name was Kiska. The girl said it was a nice name. Then she asked him to come closer, and when he did, she suddenly kissed him without any warning. He was too surprised. Kiska asked why she did that. The girl smiled, saying she wanted to thank him, and asked if he didn't like it. He got flustered and said it wasn't that he didn't like it, but he was just completely confused, wondering what this girl wanted. She moved closer and asked if he wanted to get out of the dungeon. He replied that he did want to escape this place. Seeing that, she smiled and grabbed his wrist. She declared that he had to follow her because she was going to get him out. After that, they faced the headless horse. The girl defeated it without any trouble. Seeing this, Kiska thought she was amazing. The girl asked him if she was strong. In response, the hero remarked that she was very strong. The girl used some kind of magic with her left hand. Kiska curiously asked what she had just done. The girl replied that it was a skill called item box, which allowed her to store anything. Kiska got excited, remembering that this skill might have been in the skill chest. After picking up the magic stone, she said they had to keep going. Kiska asked where they were going, and the girl replied that they were heading to the dungeon's mid-boss room. Kiska asked if they had to fight that boss. The girl explained that if they didn't defeat this monster, they wouldn't be able to leave. She explained that if he hadn't freed her, she would have been trapped for much longer. Because of the hero's good deed, Agaya said that she would fight for him. Hearing that, Kiska was a little moved. He insisted he only survived thanks to her, so it should be a mutual exchange. As they opened the door, the girl remarked that might be true. This was the dungeon boss she had mentioned, an S-class monster called a golem. Kiska was in complete awe of the monster, remarking that it was huge, possibly up to 10 meters tall. At that moment, the monster began to roar. The girl told Kiska to stand behind her, and reassured him that he would be fine. She charged forward, promising to protect him. She swung her sword at the monster, but it managed to dodge the blow and prepared to strike back at the girl. Surprisingly, Agaya was very agile and managed to dodge the blow. Kiska observed the fight, thinking she was incredibly strong, since she hadn't backed down from the golem. He told himself that she could actually win. However, the girl suddenly tripped on a stone. The monster's fist came hurtling toward her face, and when it connected, she was sent flying. Dazed, the girl watched as the monster prepared to finish her off. Kiska intervened by using his taunt skill, calling the boss an idiot and telling it that he was right here. Hearing this, the heroine grew worried and told Kiska not to do it. The golem monster became even more enraged as it prepared to punch the boy in the face, a blow strong enough to shatter the wall. Seeing this, the heroine couldn't believe her eyes. She stood there stunned and began calling Kiska's name, her voice trembling. She burst into tears, crying, I told you I'd protect you from the rubble of the wall." Kiska started to laugh and said that unfortunately for Ida, he was very good at dodging and had simply avoided the monster's attacks. The girl smiled through her tears, realizing Kiska was still alive. He then called out to her, pointing out that the monster's arm was stuck. Understanding the signal, the girl charged forward to finish it off. Agaya rushed toward the boss. She used a sword technique, and with that single attack, she sliced the boss in half. In that moment, it was clear that Heroine X was truly powerful. After witnessing this incredible display of power, Kiska felt a little embarrassed, but at the same time, he was overjoyed. Agaya then ran toward him, calling his name, and she told him that they did it. Realizing this, Kiska saw that they had defeated the golem boss, and looking at the situation, it seemed everything would finally be okay. At least that's what he thought at the time. After defeating the golem, they went through a secret passage and continued deeper into the dungeon. At that moment, after the shock wore off, the girl called out to Kiska. Agaya informed Kiska that there was a safe place nearby. After going through the secret passage, they discovered a strange room, model. The room was like a fully furnished space or a bedroom. Agaya remarked that the vampires might have already discovered this place. Kiska panicked, asking if vampires really existed here. Agaya explained that the vampires were the demons who created this dungeon and made it their fortress. Hearing this, Kiska asked if she was sure it was safe here and if the vampires would be angry that they were here. Agaya replied that they would probably be safe on the bed. She smiled and said that she was very tired and that they should get some rest. Kiska thought the opposite. He thought this was a terrible idea, but since he trusted Agaya, he figured everything would be okay. The girl blushed, calling him over. She asked him to come a little closer. This request left Kiska completely bewildered. Agaya then explained that she wanted to talk to him. At this point, they both sat down on the bed. To break the silence, Kiska asked Agaya if she found him disgusting. The girl didn't understand what Kiska meant and asked why he would think that. He answered that it was because of his silver hair. A flash of surprise appeared on the girl's face. She explained that to her that silver hair looked very beautiful, and she found it to be gentle. She said that there was something incredibly cute about Kiska's silver hair, which made him feel a little awkward. This hair was a characteristic of the species he hated, so whenever anyone saw his silver hair, they would look at him with contempt. Suddenly, he remembered Namiya, who had truly admired his silver hair for what it was. In fact, Namiya was the first person to compliment his hair, and Agaya was the second. She looked up and said that she probably thought so because she was from another world. This information took Kiska completely by surprise, and he wondered, did she really just say she's from another world? Although Kiska had never heard of such a thing, Agaya asked if he believed her. However, Kiska replied that it wasn't that he didn't believe her, but that he did. Hearing this, she just smiled, and then rested her head on his shoulder, saying that she knew he would say that. Kiska smiled and thought that maybe the strange sense of distance between them was because she came from another world. However, just then, his stomach rumbled loudly, shattering the silent atmosphere. Agaya asked, "Are you hungry?" Kiska replied, "I haven't eaten anything decent since I entered the dungeon." Suddenly, Agaya said, "I have some headless horse meat in my item box." She smiled and continued, "I'll try my hand at cooking." As Agaya prepared the meal for Kiska, Kiska waited patiently for dinner. A moment later, Agaya finished the meal and apologized for the delay. The dish she brought looked delicious. She urged Kiska to try it. Kiska was curious and decided to try a spoonful. After tasting it, he was completely surprised and said that it was truly delicious. This made Agaya incredibly happy. In the dungeon, food was scarce and Kiska usually couldn't make anything complicated. However, it seemed that Agaya had some spices in her item box, and she had used them to create this wonderful meal. Kiska was deeply moved and thought that this was the first time he'd eaten something so delicious since entering the dungeon. Kiska wondered how the food could be so good. Noticing he was acting strange, Agaya asked in surprise if he was crying and if she had put too many spices in the dish. He felt embarrassed. Kiska replied that it was just a little. After dinner, Kiska said he felt tired and was going to bed. Looking around, he realized there was only one bed in the room. He then told Agaya that he would sleep on the sofa and she could use the bed while she washed the dishes. However, Agaya told him not to worry. She said with a smile that they could share the bed. This statement made Kiska extremely flustered, and he quickly refused, saying it wasn't a good idea. That night, they both slept separately, with Agaya on the bed and Kiska on the sofa. Despite being tired, neither of them could sleep, their minds filled with thoughts and worries. Kiska thought that with Agaya's help, he might be able to escape this dungeon. He admitted that it was shameful to have to rely on a woman's strength, as his own power was nothing compared to hers. While he was thinking about what he should do, the former hero approached him with a strange smile. She told the hero that she wanted to sleep with him. This scene shocked Kiska, and he asked her what she was doing. The girl didn't answer. Agaya just stayed silent and kissed Kiska. She took his hand, called his name, and told him to touch her. Agaya asked him if his heart was beating fast. She looked straight into his eyes and said that she loved him. She began to repeat this declaration over and over. Kiska, panicked, said that he hadn't done anything to make her fall in love with him, which left Agaya completely bewildered. She explained that he had saved her. She revealed that she had been imprisoned in a deep dungeon for hundreds of years, waiting alone, hoping a prince would come to her rescue. Every time she met someone in the dungeon, she would grant them an ability. Just then, the boy realized that the hero had given him that ability so that he could save her. Continuing to explain, she said it was useless because those with the ability would be full of enthusiasm, but would only get so far before failing. In other words, Kiska was the only one who could get close to her. She moved closer to his face, saying she had been waiting for him and calling him her Prince Charming. Hearing this, Kiska froze. Gathering all her courage, Agaya began to take off her clothes. However, Kiska asked her to wait and stop. He explained that he couldn't do this with her. She hesitantly asked why. Kiska explained that he was dating someone else. The former hero said she understood but still moved closer, placing her hands on his shoulders. She lay on top of him and explained that it didn't matter. With a haunting look in her eyes, she said that she would be happy, even as his number two, as long as he loved her. After saying that, she kissed him. Haunted by everything that had happened in his life, Kiska began to recall all the terrible things that had happened to Namiya. As the former hero kissed him, his voice began to tremble. Panicking, Kiska pushed Agaya away, but he quickly realized what he had just done. With a trembling voice, he apologized and asked if she was okay. Kiska felt like a disgusting creature, and Agaya's aggressive actions reminded him of the people who had hurt Namiya. The girl looked a little embarrassed and apologized, saying that she had probably been too hasty. Then she went to her bed and lay down to sleep. Kiska felt a pang of regret, remembering that he had shoved her away without thinking. In his mind, he admitted that he should have handled it more tactfully. Although he felt awful, he also realized that escaping the dungeon without her help would be very difficult. As he prepared to sleep, he thought, I have to find a way to convince her to change her mind tomorrow. A while later, he woke up. He sat up, feeling a heaviness, and looked to his side. That's when he realized Agaya was right in front of him, hovering like some supernatural spirit. Seeing this, he began to tremble and break out in a nervous sweat. In reality, she was hanging, and he knew what that meant. He felt dizzy as he took in the sight. He started to feel nauseous, his body trembling. He wondered if this was his fault. His whole body trembled from head to toe, his hands gripping his head as he wondered if this was happening because he had rejected Agaya. While struggling with these thoughts, he sighed, muttering that he couldn't understand what was happening. In desperation, he began to flee, telling himself it wasn't his fault. Not knowing what else to do, he entered the same passageway as before. As he passed through, he insisted that this was really just an accident. Coming out of the passageway, he was spotted by headless, flaming horses. One of them charged at him, and the headless horse kicked him in the back. On the verge of death, he thought that he'd only made it this far thanks to Agaya, and now she would be easily killed. A moment later, he woke up, and he realized he had reset to after a bear attack. Kiska, worried, remembered that Agaya had died because of him. As he left the room, he wondered what he should do. He asked himself if he should have accepted her love. A man full of contradictions, he understood that she was no longer alive. And yet Agaya was still alive because he had gone back in time. He rushed to the glass, touched it, and declared that this time he would accept her love, just as she'd offered before. With just a light touch, the glass shattered. He stared, stunned, at the girl lying motionless on the floor. In his heart, he resolved that this time he would save her. Confused, the girl asked him his name. He smiled and replied that his name was Kiska. She observed the main character, saying she'd never heard his name before, but felt that something was off about him. Kiska was confused. The main character wondered what was happening, and he realized that the girl in front of him didn't seem like Agaya. He even asked if it was really her. The girl replied that yes, it was her. With a serious expression, she said she'd never been asked that before. At this, the main character wondered if he should tell her he knew her from another timeline, and that she was the one who had given him the ability to save and reset. He began to wonder whether he should say it, while at the same time questioning what happened the last time he acted against her. In a worried tone, Kiska said that she had gone too far and that he wasn't her enemy, but immediately the girl started to strangle him. With a crazed look on her face, her hands gripped his neck. She asked if this was why she felt there was something wrong with him. He tried to make her stop, but he wasn't strong enough. Her attitude changing completely, Agaya looked at him and told him to listen very carefully. She explained that he shouldn't make the mistake of thinking things would go back to the way they were. When you die, she said, even in death, your actions will remain etched upon your soul. Kiska panicked and he started to ask who she was. With a sadistic smile, she explained that she wouldn't tell a villain like him who she really was. Kiska then begged to speak with Agaya immediately. But the former hero replied that she didn't want to, and that Agaya didn't want to talk to him either. Looking at him with ice-cold eyes, she began to offer some advice, saying that he shouldn't get involved with Agaya anymore. After she finished speaking, she ended it by breaking his neck. After dying in such a tragic way, he woke up at the checkpoint again. He was worried, and he started telling himself that he couldn't understand what was happening. He wondered what had just happened, and whether it was some kind of second personality. Then, he remembered the girl's advice. Never get involved with Agaya again. He understood that if he met her again, he would die. And if that happened, it would be the end for him. So he decided not to meet her again and not to break her seal. However, he realized that it would be very difficult to complete the dungeon's challenge without Agaya's help. In this situation, he would have to find another way to get through. When it was time to face the attack from the pentagram star, Kiska remembered entering the middle gate before and decided to try the left gate this time. As he did so, he felt himself being transported to another location. Looking around, he realized there was only a single path. Just like the place where Agaya had been, Kiska began to explore the new area, and then he stumbled upon a girl sitting all by herself, calmly drinking tea. Seeing this, he was completely astonished. The girl opened her eyes and looked at him, and she said that this was truly unusual. She couldn't believe that someone had actually managed to get into this place. However, the protagonist was still in a daze, unable to believe that a girl was calmly drinking tea in this horrible dungeon. He began to wonder who this girl was and what she was doing here. At that moment, the girl interrupted Kiska's thoughts by asking what he wanted and if he needed anything from her. Kiska was confused. He explained that he was trying to find a way out of this dungeon. The girl smiled and said that she understood. Suddenly, she declared it a grave insult, leaving him utterly bewildered. She explained that she was the great progenitor of the vampire race. With a sadistic glint in her eye, she said she doubted he understood what that meant, since he didn't look like much of a scholar. Using her sharp fingernails, she cut into her own arm. Then she approached the protagonist and dealt a fatal blow. He began to scream in agony, collapsing to the ground. All he heard was the girl saying that he would pay with his life. The last thing he saw before he died was the brutal smile of that insane girl. After this death, he woke up once again at the checkpoint in the bear room. He realized he had been killed yet again. Horrified, Kiska told himself that this dungeon was full of lunatics. Kiska recalled what Agaya had once said. Some monsters had turned these dungeons into their fortresses. He realized it was one of those very monsters that had killed him, and that it was the vampire progenitor named Udith. This girl was dressed as elegantly as a noblewoman. The protagonist figured he was no match for someone so dangerous, who could strike without warning. He left the bear room, running while thinking about what to do next. He told himself there was only one option left. The third circle, the one he hadn't tried yet. Standing before this new circle, he thought that this had to be the right choice. After stepping into the circle, he was transported to the third location. Walking and looking around, he noticed the place looked similar to the previous corridors, and he hoped there wouldn't be any danger ahead. Just then, he saw a sword at the end of the corridor. As he got closer, he realized it was a sword, and even though it felt suspicious, he decided to go for it. Since he'd come here unarmed, if the sword was powerful, it could be his ticket out. He grabbed the sword, but the moment he did, he felt something was wrong. Instantly, a powerful electric shock coursed through him. Holding the sword, he felt an intense pain spreading through his entire body. He found he couldn't open his hand, which was clamped tight around the sword, and the pain lasted for several minutes. The pain was so intense that over time, he gradually lost consciousness. A moment later, he woke up. He stood up and realized he was still alive. However, when he looked to his side, he saw the sword had regenerated his arm. It seemed to have merged with his arm as if it were some kind of symbiote. He wondered what this thing was, as his hands seemed to have fused with the sword. When he moved his arm, he realized the sword was extremely heavy. Terrified, he wondered what to do about this, and saw no other choice. Kiska continued walking through the dungeon's corridors, the sword still attached to his arm. He tried to walk but couldn't lift the arm holding the sword because of its weight. Suddenly, he saw the head of a monster. That terrifying monster was an A-rank werewolf. Upon spotting its target, the wolf began to howl. He broke into a sweat, anxious and thinking this was impossible, that he was going to die again. But unexpectedly, the sword pulled him toward the monster. They struck the werewolf with several fatal blows. In just a few seconds, the wolf was completely defeated. Moving forward, Kiska wondered what had just happened. It felt like the sword had a life of its own, as it had moved automatically without his control. He swallowed hard, still reeling from the shock. He reassured himself that it didn't matter anyway. He smiled and said he would use anything to escape this dungeon, even a terrifying and disgusting sword. Sometime later, he defeated several Agaya wolves. As he continued walking through the dungeon, he thought that this black sword was truly powerful, and with it, he could defeat any enemy in his path. Along the way, he came across a gate. Given the circumstances, he thought this must be the mid-boss room. He remembered the golem from last time when he was with Agaya, and wondered if it would be the same this time. Without hesitation, he entered the room. This time, the monster was an S-rank creature, a griffin. Kiska grew anxious. He realized this was indeed the mid-boss, and it looked incredibly strong. Without a moment's hesitation, the S-rank monster charged at him. Kiska managed to dodge, narrowly escaping death thanks to the sword's power. After dodging, he struck a confident, heroic pose. And he declared that now, with this black sword, he could fight. The griffin charged again. But this time, he used the sword for defense. He blocked many of the monster's attacks. He dodged once more, understanding that the only thing he could do now was to press forward. He decided not to interfere with the black sword's movements. At that moment, he simply waited for the S-rank monster to approach, and then the sword unleashed a fatal blow on the griffin. He declared that after all, he might just win after defeating the boss. When the boss was defeated, he started to smile. A small door opened up, and he remembered this was exactly what happened with the golem when it was defeated. As he stepped through the door, he declared that he would use this sword to escape the dungeon in no time. Time passed, and he looked very tired as the sword was gradually consuming his body. He wondered if the sword had gotten a little bigger as he continued through the hallways. Suddenly he saw someone up ahead. It was the vampire Udith, who remarked that it seemed he had grown quite a bit. He was very surprised, asking why she was here. They stood facing each other, staring down the hallway, both of them looking afraid. He asked her what she wanted, while the girl laughed and asked if his body was still conscious. Udith said that if he had to ask, he should know what was coming, and the answer was obvious. With a sadistic smile, she declared that this was to be his death. She planned to subdue the parasitic sword attached to his arm. He said he didn't understand what she was talking about regarding a parasitic sword. The girl explained that the sword he was using was the Puppet Master, a parasitic sword. She further explained that it grows by parasitizing a person and consuming monsters, making it an extremely dangerous item. She had thought it would be fine to leave him alone since this dungeon was rarely visited. The boy worriedly asked if she was going to kill him, and she replied that she was. She tore off her own arm while praising the boy, saying that he was a quick learner. He was shocked as he watched the girl rip off her own arm, and he wondered what she was going to do. Udith held her severed arm, and the girl continued to smile without showing any sign of pain. Using her own blood, she created another arm and a sword. Then she told him to do her a favor and die. Now she wasn't giving him any chance to react. The girl lunged at the protagonist. However, he still managed to defend himself with the parasitic sword. The vampire was furious, insisting that he must die. The two continued their sword fight while the young man swore he would not lose. Quickly, the vampire created some distance between them. She smiled and said that this wasn't so simple after all. Not when the parasitic sword was getting this excited. The hero wondered if this was his chance. The vampire threw her sword into the air and used a technique called cruel blood rain. Abruptly, the sword shattered, and a barrage of fragments flew towards the hero, hitting him with multiple pieces of the blade. Udith looked at the completely defeated protagonist. Udith admitted that she didn't want to use this move because it made her left arm unusable for a while, but she had no other choice. When he woke up, the young man realized he had been reset once again. Overwhelmed with frustration, he wondered if this was the right choice, reflecting that he understood the significant risks. He decided to put the situation into perspective. Using the first transportation circle, he was supposed to find the sealed Agaya, and if he broke the seal, he would be killed by her instantly. However, by using the second circle, he would be killed by the vampire with nothing he could do about it. Using the third circle, he would get the parasitic sword and venture deeper into the dungeon. But eventually, the vampire would appear and kill him again. He worried, thinking that if he wanted to live as long as possible, he would have to choose the third option. So, his goal became to defeat the vampire Udith with the help of the cursed sword and overcome the dungeon. But even knowing this, he still had no idea what to do to achieve that outcome. He recalled what the vampire had said about the sword, that it was parasitic to its user, devoured monsters, and was an extremely dangerous item. As he left the room, he realized that he would have to kill enough monsters to push the sword to its limit. Only then could he possibly defeat Udith. The dungeon warned that this was a race against time before Udith appeared. He panted after a long run. He realized he only had about 5 hours left before she would appear again. Facing a transfer circle, he remembered the last time he went through a magic circle. Udith had been waiting, and as soon as he stepped into the circle, he was teleported. He hoped she wouldn't be there this time. Looking towards the end of the corridor, he saw that she was no longer in her usual spot. He smiled, telling himself that if that was the case, he would keep moving forward. However, as he turned to the side, he noticed something was off. A pack of werewolves was gathering. In that moment, the monsters noticed his presence and turned their attention to him. He started to laugh, thanking them. And then he charged at the monsters. He declared that he would annihilate them all. Meanwhile, Udith was calmly walking through the halls, where she found the dead wolves on the ground. She remarked that someone had clearly been feeding the hero well. She also commented that the puppet master had grown significantly, and that defeating him this time would be a challenge. However, as she observed him, she noticed something strange. Half of Kiska's body had been consumed by the parasitic sword. The boy then asked who was speaking, to which the vampire replied with a smile. It seemed the body's original consciousness had vanished. Still confused, the hero asked what she was talking about, but the vampire simply tore off her own arm, saying it didn't change the fact that she was going to kill him. The vampire then smiled, adding that she would help him by ending his life. A moment later, the main character was back at the previous checkpoint. He had been killed by the vampire. Terrified, the boy told himself that he couldn't defeat Udith, not even with the puppet sword in hand. Still, he didn't give up. He tried again and again, sometimes even coming close to victory. But each of those times, the sword would completely take over his consciousness. His spirit broken, the boy said there was no point in leaving the dungeon in this state, and that all 3 paths he chose led to the same outcome. He always lost control. Suddenly, the main character was struck with an idea. He remembered he needed to try something decisive. He said that even if it failed before, now, after dying so many times, he had to try again. He declared that there was no place for Cordis in the face of death. In the Pentagon room, he chose one of the circles, saying it was a slim chance. A while later, he confronted the vampire Udith, who remarked that this was a rare sight. Holding a teacup, the girl said she wasn't aware an intruder had made it this far, and asked what he wanted. At that moment, he recalled the last time when she had accused him of disrespect, and ultimately killed him. Realizing this, he decided to completely change his approach. He knelt before her, addressing her as the great and ancient vampire Udith Sama. He realized he needed to be more respectful, which took the vampire by surprise. On his knees, Kiska politely asked the vampire if she would accept him as her disciple. Seeing this, the girl looked somewhat bored. However, in less than a second, her expression shifted into a terrifying smile. She remarked that what he had just said was indeed very interesting. Kiska was surprised. The hero realized this was the best decision, and that he might now have a way to survive. However, Udith asked what benefit she would get from taking him as a disciple. At that moment, Kiska struggled to think of what to say. Excited, he explained that if he became her disciple, he would be her right-hand man and do everything she asked. However, the vampire found this boring. She said it was disgusting and told him to die quickly. Then she struck a fatal blow. Kiska realized he had died once again, but instead of being sad, he felt excited because it was actually worth it, and that maybe this was the right path. He understood that to conquer this dungeon, he needed to be stronger than he was. To achieve that goal, he decided to become Udith's student. After all, she was a vampire he could talk to, not just some mindless monster. At that moment, Kiska realized that to become her disciple, he had to consider the benefits he could offer. He understood that if he could offer her something of value, then he might have a chance to become her student. Sometime later, Kiska was once again kneeling before the vampire. The vampire, curious, asked what she would get out of this arrangement. Kiska then said that Udith must have been in the dungeon for a very long time, and confidently suggested that she must feel lonely. He explained that he could be someone for her to talk to. The vampire threw her sword into the air, and used a technique called cruel blood rain. Abruptly, the sword shattered, and a barrage of fragments flew towards the hero, hitting him with multiple pieces of the blade. Udith looked at the completely defeated protagonist. Udith admitted that she didn't want to use this move because it made her left arm unusable for a while, but she had no other choice. When he woke up, the young man realized he had been reset once again. Overwhelmed with frustration, he wondered if this was the right choice, reflecting that he understood the significant risks. He decided to put the situation into perspective. Using the first transportation circle, he was supposed to find the sealed Agaya, and if he broke the seal, he would be killed by her instantly. However, by using the second circle, he would be killed by the vampire with nothing he could do about it. Using the third circle, he would get the parasitic sword and venture deeper into the dungeon. But eventually, the vampire would appear and kill him again. He worried, thinking that if he wanted to live as long as possible, he would have to choose the third option. So, his goal became to defeat the vampire Udith with the help of the cursed sword and overcome the dungeon. But even knowing this, he still had no idea what to do to achieve that outcome. He recalled what the vampire had said about the sword, that it was parasitic to its user, devoured monsters, and was an extremely dangerous item. As he left the room, he realized that he would have to kill enough monsters to push the sword to its limit. Only then could he possibly defeat Udith. The dungeon warned that this was a race against time before Udith appeared. He panted after a long run. He realized he only had about 5 hours left before she would appear again. Facing a transfer circle, he remembered the last time he went through a magic circle. Udith had been waiting, and as soon as he stepped into the circle, he was teleported. He hoped she wouldn't be there this time. Looking towards the end of the corridor, he saw that she was no longer in her usual spot. He smiled, telling himself that if that was the case, he would keep moving forward. However, as he turned to the side, he noticed something was off. A pack of werewolves was gathering. In that moment, the monsters noticed his presence and turned their attention to him. He started to laugh, thanking them. And then he charged at the monsters. He declared that he would annihilate them all. Meanwhile, Udith was calmly walking through the halls, where she found the dead wolves on the ground. She remarked that someone had clearly been feeding the hero well. She also commented that the puppet master had grown significantly, and that defeating him this time would be a challenge. However, as she observed him, she noticed something strange. Half of Kiska's body had been consumed by the parasitic sword. The boy then asked who was speaking, to which the vampire replied with a smile. It seemed the body's original consciousness had vanished. Still confused, the hero asked what she was talking about, but the vampire simply tore off her own arm, saying it didn't change the fact that she was going to kill him. The vampire then smiled, adding that she would help him by ending his life. A moment later, the main character was back at the previous checkpoint. He had been killed by the vampire. Terrified, the boy told himself that he couldn't defeat Udith, not even with the puppet sword in hand. Still, he didn't give up. He tried again and again, sometimes even coming close to victory. But each of those times, the sword would completely take over his consciousness. His spirit broken, the boy said there was no point in leaving the dungeon in this state, and that all three paths he chose led to the same outcome. He always lost control. Suddenly, the main character was struck with an idea. He remembered he needed to try something decisive. He said that even if it failed before, now, after dying so many times, he had to try again. He declared that there was no place for cowardice in the face of death. In the Pentagon room, he chose one of the circles, saying it was a slim chance. A while later, he confronted the vampire Udith, who remarked that this was a rare sight. Holding a teacup, the girl said she wasn't aware an intruder had made it this far, and asked what he wanted. At that moment, he recalled the last time when she had accused him of disrespect, and ultimately killed him. Realizing this, he decided to completely change his approach. He knelt before her, addressing her as the great and ancient vampire Udith Sama. He realized he needed to be more respectful, which took the vampire by surprise. On his knees, Kiska politely asked the vampire if she would accept him as her disciple. Seeing this, the girl looked somewhat bored. However, in less than a second, her expression shifted into a terrifying smile. She remarked that what he had just said was indeed very interesting. Kiska was surprised. The hero realized this was the best decision, and that he might now have a way to survive. However, Udith asked what benefit she would get from taking him as a disciple. At that moment, Kiska struggled to think of what to say. Excited, he explained that if he became her disciple, he would be her right-hand man and do everything she asked. However, the vampire found this boring. She said it was disgusting and told him to die quickly. Then she struck a fatal blow. Kiska realized he had died once again, but instead of being sad, he felt excited because it was actually worth it, and that maybe this was the right path. He understood that to conquer this dungeon, he needed to be stronger than he was. To achieve that goal, he decided to become Udith's student. After all, she was a vampire he could talk to, not just some mindless monster. At that moment, Kiska realized that to become her disciple, he had to consider the benefits he could offer. He understood that if he could offer her something of value, then he might have a chance to become her student. Sometime later, Kiska was once again kneeling before the vampire. The vampire, curious, asked what she would get out of this arrangement. Kiska then said that Udith must have been in the dungeon for a very long time, and confidently suggested that she must feel lonely. He explained that he could be someone for her to talk to. However, the vampire explained that, actually, feeling lonely wasn't so bad. Just then, she prepared to grab his arm. This made the boy panic and despair. He begged her to wait a moment, saying he had more to offer. When she stopped, he felt relieved to still be alive. He went on to explain that although he didn't look it, he had gone through years of hard training and had absolute confidence in his strength. He smiled and explained that he could handle all the heavy lifting, especially when it came to building a new hideout. She lifted a heavy table with one hand, and pointed out that in terms of strength, she believed she was far superior to him. Kiska, still on his knees, admitted that she was right. Bored now, the vampire asked if he had anything else to say. While looking at her, the protagonist thought about what he could possibly offer Udith, but he couldn't think of anything. His body trembled. He awaited his death, but suddenly he stood up. He revealed to the girl that he really just wanted to survive and leave this dungeon. He explained that he was born in the city of Katarov, where this dungeon is located, and had been hunted his whole life. He also said that the only woman he ever loved was killed by evil men. His body trembled, as he said that he was blamed for her death and exiled to this dungeon. Ignoring his sad story, Udith asked what any of that had to do with her, her sharp gaze fixed on him. The main character declared that he wanted revenge on the entire village. He revealed that he wanted to torture and kill them in the most horrifying ways imaginable, and make sure every last one of them died. He concluded by telling the vampire that what he could offer her was, in fact, a spectacular massacre. Hearing this, the girl was surprised, but she quickly broke into a sadistic, blushing smile. The vampire said that it sounded very interesting, and she admitted that she was starting to get curious about what would happen. This made the main character very happy, but she cut him off, saying it was too soon to celebrate. Looking down the hall, she explained that if he could pass a test, he would be allowed to become her disciple. She asked if he had used the automatic teleportation circle to get to the dungeon, and he confirmed that he had. Udith explained that this dungeon had a special rule. Once someone enters the automatic teleportation circle, they can't go back the way they came. A moment later, they reached a dead end, and Kiska realized this was the room he'd been teleported to. Just then, the girl pressed a hidden brick. She explained that with a little secret trick, it's possible to choose an alternate route. Seeing this, Kiska was surprised, as he had no idea there was a hidden passage here. Once again, they came to another dead end, and she pressed another hidden mechanism. A door slid open, and Kiska recognized it as the robot sword room. Udith explained that this sword had a rather unpleasant property, and that she'd always wanted to get rid of it, but couldn't touch it because it was a parasite. Worried, Kiska asked what she wanted him to do. The vampire replied that she wanted him to defeat the sword's parasite and take control of it. If he could do that, he would pass the test. In utter disbelief, Kiska asked if that was even possible, and the vampire said that out of 10 people who tried, 9 failed. However, she also explained that he had no other choice. If he refused, he would die. Trembling with fear, the main character accepted the offer, and Udith then explained the proper way to do it. He had to grab the tip of the sword, not the hilt, and pull it out in a single motion. Horrified, the main character gripped the sword by its blade. His body trembled from the sheer weight of the sword. He asked the vampire what to do next, and she replied that he had to swallow it, explaining that he needed to place the tip in his mouth, look up, and push it all the way down his throat. The hero thought that if he didn't do it, she would kill him. At that moment, he followed the vampire's command. As he swallowed the cursed sword, he wondered if this was how he would die. Suddenly, he woke up in a strange reality, one that seemed to be the sword's own domain. The energy of the sword, when it saw him, it asked if he wanted to become its master. Terrified, he asked what the thing in front of him was, and it replied that it was the main body of the puppet sword. Kiska understood that this was the sword's true form and wondered where he was. The sword replied that it believed this was the deepest part of its inner self. Kiska called out to the puppet sword. He said that he needed its power. Without any objection, the spirit of the puppet sword agreed. Kiska was surprised. He asked if it was really that easy. The spirit simply replied that it was an interesting answer. It explained that he was the one who had initiated this. Kiska was astonished. The hero said he thought it would refuse him, but it said the opposite. It revealed that there was something nostalgic in his soul that made it believe he could carry on. At that moment, it turned its back on him. A moment later, Kiska woke up, and the puppet sword's voice called him master, saying it was nice to be able to laugh. The vampire remarked that she didn't think he would actually survive. In that case, the puppet veins had been successfully controlled. Udith then told him that he had passed the test, and that she was now honored to serve him. Kiska knelt on the ground, saying he was under her command, and from then on, he became the disciple of the vampire Udith. From that day forward, a strange life began by her side. He had succeeded in becoming Udith's disciple, and spent his nights in the room where he and Agaya had once stayed in a past life. Each base only had one bed, which was why they had to sleep in separate rooms. A little later, the hero entered Udith's room. However, he was startled when he saw a strange set of clothes on the table. Just then, the vampire woke up and greeted him. She remarked that he had arrived quite early, Kiska stammered, bowing and wishing her good morning, while silently thinking to himself how charming she was. Udith sat up in bed and announced that she would begin his training as her disciple, and she asked if he was ready. Kiska replied that he was ready and would endure any trial. Then she told him to wait a moment while she changed her clothes. A moment later, the two of them were walking down the hallway, and the vampire asked him what skills he had. Kiska replied that he only had one skill, called Provoke. Hearing this, the vampire commented that the skill seemed a bit strange. Kiska got nervous, thinking to himself that he actually had two skills, Provoke and Save and Restart, but he decided to keep the second one a secret. They stopped at a certain spot in the hallway, and the girl activated a secret door. Kiska was surprised to discover there really was a secret passage, and Udith explained that she had memorized the entire dungeon map after living there for 1,000 years. Kiska was incredibly impressed, thinking to himself that it was amazing to be able to live here for 1,000 years, and believed he'd made the right choice in becoming her disciple. They opened another secret cell in the dungeon. Udith explained that their current goal was to collect some skills. She mentioned she could modify all the treasures in the dungeon, which greatly impressed Kiska. Upon opening the chest, Kiska received the Jewel of Intelligence, which activated automatically. A full list appeared before his eyes, and the system asked him to choose a skill from the available options. Kiska realized this was like the list he had seen before, but there were some new skills he'd never seen, like tremor and perception. He called out to his master. Kiska asked Udith which skill he should choose. She explained that the swordsmanship skill was the only one that caught her eye, but because of the parasite in his body, he would be able to control it at will. Therefore, she suggested he pick the swordsmanship skill. Following her advice, Kiska chose the skill and received a notification that he had learned the swordsmanship skill. Kiska was excited, thinking he could now freely use the marionette sword. However, his master called out to him and told him they needed to go to the deepest part of the dungeon for the next skill. Hearing this, Kiska was shocked, but his master didn't seem to care. His master said they had to go immediately. A short while later, the two of them walked through the dungeon's corridors. As they walked, Kiska noticed this was the deepest part, and they had reached it through secret passages, encountering very few enemies. However, he still felt that something was wrong. His master announced that they had arrived and were now standing before a treasure chest just like Annie's. Kiska realized this was a skill chest, and his master told him this was a test of luck. She explained that the wisdom crystal in this chest only allowed him to receive one skill, and it would be chosen randomly by rank. His master added that the boy's luck would now be put to the test. Kiska hesitated for a moment. He opened the chest, telling himself he hoped it would grant him a good skill. Just then, the protagonist received a notification that he had acquired the attribute allocation skill. His master seemed confused, wondering what that meant. Udith explained it was a rare skill, but without any magical ability, it wouldn't be very useful right now. The boy thought to himself that, in short, this was a huge failure. A little sheepishly, his master explained that all he needed to do was learn a magic skill in the future and told him not to feel discouraged. She turned away, telling him to return to the hideout. But at that moment, the protagonist asked a question, which made his master curious. Kiska asked about what lay behind that door. His master replied that that's the room where the dungeon boss resides, and if you defeat it, you'll be able to leave the dungeon. This piqued Kiska's interest. Kiska asked anxiously if he could escape the dungeon by defeating the boss, and the girl confirmed it. Looking at the door, Kiska thought that he had finally found a way to escape this dungeon. Kiska asked his teacher if she could easily defeat the boss, but she explained that the boss here is SS rank, and that she has been in this dungeon ever since the current boss arrived, unable to leave for the past 50 years. In other words, even she couldn't defeat this dungeon's boss. Udith concluded that in order to escape, he would have to become stronger than her, and they would need more help to defeat the boss. She smiled and said that to achieve this, they had to get back to his training. Fired up, Kiska ran after her, saying they should get started right away. In the dungeon, she cut her hand and explained that this was how she controlled the blood in her body. Looking at her hand, Kiska thought that he already knew this, because she had killed him in his past lives. At that moment, the boy watched as her blood turned into a knife, and he realized she could turn it into anything, depending on the amount of blood. Udith explained to the main character that he could also use his marionette sword in a similar way, by focusing on his body with his bare hands. He began to concentrate, and suddenly the sword appeared in his hand. He then received a notification that he had acquired the marionette usage skill, along with a sub-skill, a black sword. Delighted, Kiska told his master that he'd done it. She smiled, saying that at least now he was ready to fight. He was happy, thinking he could finally fight, but his master called for his attention. Udith told Kiska that she was going to give him his first task, and she said that she wanted him to fight her. If he could touch her with his sword just once, he would complete the task. With a trembling voice, he asked if it was really okay to do that. But the vampire replied that he should just assume she doesn't want to kill her student. Kiska was flustered, and the student said that he just didn't want to hurt her. Hearing this, the vampire became furious, saying in a low growl, "Fine. As you can see, I have a healing ability." With a crazed smile, she raised her dagger. She asked if he really thought he could hurt her. At that moment, the hero wondered if he had made Udith angry. She lunged at him, saying that if he thought he could, then he'd better prove it. He managed to dodge her attack, but he turned his back on his opponent. He was nearly struck again. He thought Udith was just eager to train, but something told him he'd actually made her angry. With a menacing look, his master told him that just dodging wasn't going to be enough to pass the test. Once again, as an attack came crashing down from above, the boy managed to block it with his cursed sword. However, the vampire's strength was on a completely different level, and she easily sent him flying. He knew his swordsmanship was good enough to dodge, but he also knew she was an exceptional warrior who could wield a greatsword with just one hand. And if he could land a hit on her, it would be incredibly impressive. Even though this was just training, If she kept attacking like this, she could actually kill him. He thought he needed to attack her as quickly as possible to end the match, so he decided to keep dodging until he found an opening. He did just that, trying to strike her with his sword, but she dodged it with ease, much to his surprise. He realized it was futile. If she kept dodging like that, he would never reach his goal. At that moment, he remembered the time she'd killed him before. She'd used a greatsword then, which meant she couldn't move carelessly, but this time she was using a dagger, and she lunged at him. When he saw his master approaching, he thought that if it was just a dagger, he might actually have a chance to hit her. He quickly raised his sword to block his master's strike, thinking this was his chance to attack. He told himself that her attack wouldn't force him back this time, so he had to counter with his own sword. He aimed straight for her head, however the vampire narrowly dodged it, but in doing so, his blade grazed her arm. Seeing this, the protagonist was both shocked and worried that he had finally succeeded. But he realized he had struck his master. He started to apologize in a trembling voice and moved closer, asking if she was okay. The girl smiled and said a little scratch like this was nothing. Kiska then remembered that she had once torn off her own arm. Udith congratulated her student, telling him he had completed his first task. Kiska bowed his head and thanked his master, thinking that he'd finally gotten stronger thanks in part to his puppet sword and his own skills. He was glad he'd made the right decision in becoming Udith's student. Just then, his master called out to him. She said his fighting style and movements were very standard, and asked if he possessed any actual combat skills. Kiska was flustered. He thought back on everything he'd been through and replied that he didn't really have many skills. Even more impressed, the vampire said that if that was the case, he must have a lot of talent. As the boy thought about it, the truth was that he did have combat experience. A moment later, the heroes were trapped in a room, facing headless, flaming horses. At that moment, he started to think about this place. Confidently, he said that he could get through by using the secret tunnel his master had taught him about. Now, he would have to face the flaming, headless horses, just as his master had warned that today would be a practical training session. These monsters quickly launched some sort of fire sword at the hero, who used his cursed sword to defend against all the attacks. However, at the same time, the vampire threw a knife at the hero. The boy who managed to block the knife, Udith told him that he needed to keep his hands tighter, and that when fighting multiple enemies, he should also make his movements cleaner. Kiska replied that he would do so, and he prepared to continue the fight. Kiska focused, thinking about keeping his hands tight and fighting cleanly, just as his master had said. He quickly blocked all the fire swords, much more easily. Satisfied with the result, he said he had successfully defended against all the attacks, and right then, his master ordered him to attack the monsters. She explained that the headless horses were out of mana, and with his new sword, they were nothing more than soulless lumps of flesh. With an enthusiastic smile, the girl said that he understood that, and for that reason, he should attack them. Immediately, the hero obeyed. He advanced toward the headless horses. He thought to himself that he had to push forward. And then he attacked the mule on his left, and he did so without any difficulty. Then he knew he needed to attack the other mule on his right. And with a single blow, he defeated it. Then he realized that after defeating the two headless horses, a third one was trying to escape. But he managed to catch up to it, and he took it down with just one sword strike. In the distance, the master seemed pleased as she watched her student's performance. She smiled, congratulating Kiska on the result, and he thanked her. However, the main character said that if it hadn't been for the girl's help, he probably wouldn't be alive today. Udith commented that if he died in this place, it would take her decades to be able to leave, and even she didn't know how long it would take. She then said that she would make him stronger, and for that reason, he should be a little more confident. Hearing this, the student bowed his head and shouted that he would do his best. At that moment, the system announced that the monster extermination had been confirmed, and points were being added. Seeing this, the vampire remarked that it seemed the boy had earned some skill points, so she suggested he start using them. He did so and opened the status screen in front of him. Kiska was moved to see that he had finally filled all 5 of his skill slots. Looking at the list, he saw he now had 15 points available to use. He felt stronger thanks to his swordsmanship and puppetry skills, and knew that if he had to choose among all his skills, he would pick these 2. However, he quickly realized that he needed another 30 points to upgrade his swordsmanship, and even more to upgrade his puppetry skill. Just then, his master asked him how he was doing. Kiska approached her, saying that he wanted to improve his swordsmanship and was thinking of saving up 30 points. Udith said that was a good choice. Then she left the room, saying that was enough for today. Sometime later, the two of them were back home, and the vampire seemed to be getting impatient about something. Breaking the silence, she asked Kiska if he was done yet, and he replied that he was, and would bring it right over. He smiled and approached his master, apologizing for the delay. He recalled that it had always been his job to prepare tea for his master ever since becoming her disciple. This tea was brewed from monster blood. After taking a sip, the vampire said the tea was delicious, while the hero mused on how she enjoyed drinking monster blood from a teacup. He had never wanted to drink monster blood himself, but seeing the vampire drink it, he thought it must be quite tasty. Cutting off his train of thought, Udith asked about dinner. Kiska explained that the meal was almost ready. A moment later, he brought dinner to his master's table, thanking her for her patience and explaining that it was headless horse steak. Looking bored, Udith remarked that it was the same thing they had yesterday. Feeling embarrassed, the hero explained that there wasn't much he could do since they didn't have many ingredients. But he had defeated a few plant monsters and made a salad. However, the vampire revealed that she wasn't fond of salad because it didn't taste good. Kiska told her that if she didn't eat her vegetables, she'd become malnourished. However, she explained that since she was a vampire, she didn't need nutrition. Leaving the room, the hero asked her to wait a moment. A moment later, he returned with some dungeon fruits. This made the vampire very excited, and her disciple explained that he found them behind a dead tree while gathering leaves, and decided to pick them. Smiling, he said that at first he planned to leave them for a few more days before harvesting, thinking they could be used for something later on. But he changed his mind because today was a special day. After that, the two began to eat. Breaking the silence, the hero said that if they had more ingredients, he could make a better meal. The vampire replied that if she could leave the dungeon, she could gather more ingredients. The hero curiously asked her if it was true that she'd left the dungeon before, as she had mentioned. Udith replied that it was true and that she had been outside many times before, as dungeons are more suitable for vampires since they aren't exposed to sunlight. Kiska started to understand, saying that a new boss must have appeared afterward, and now she was prevented from leaving this place. However, the vampire said that might be one of the reasons, but not the only one. This left her disciple feeling confused. She explained that not long ago there was a room separate from the boss rooms, and it had a teleportation circle that allowed people to enter and leave the dungeon. Kiska was stunned, saying he never knew such a thing existed. Udith seemed a bit dejected. The girl said she was the only one who knew about it, but one day someone appeared and destroyed it. She concluded that this was the reason she could no longer leave the dungeon. Surprised, Kiska asked her if she knew who had done it, but she replied that she didn't know who could have done such a thing. However, Udith remembered something and said that there might be someone connected to it. Udith explained that the people who sealed Agaya in this place might be the same ones who destroyed the teleportation circle. Hearing the name Agaya, the hero was stunned, a chill running down his spine. Udith continued, saying they destroyed the teleportation circle to ensure that girl could never escape the dungeon. Kiska asked the vampire if she knew about Agaya, and she replied that of course she did. She remarked that Agaya was an exceptional person. She revealed that it was Agaya who defeated the Monster King, and this information stunned the hero once again. He also felt uneasy, thinking this was all very strange, because the story he had heard was completely different. In a famous tale, it was said that the Monster King was killed by a warrior named Eligion, who was known as a great hero. He wondered if Agaya was really the one who did it. Wanting to know more about the former heroine, he asked the vampire if Agaya was sealed in the dungeon. She replied that she didn't know the details, but then told Kiska she needed to warn him about something. With a serious expression, she told him that he must never try to break Agaya's seal, no matter the reason or circumstance. She explained that Agaya was the one who defeated the Monster King, and is powerful enough to destroy the entire world. And she couldn't imagine what would happen if someone were to break her seal. A worried Kiska said that he understood. He thought to himself that in a past life he had accidentally broken Agaya's seal, and he hoped this wouldn't cause any problems for him in the future. The hero asked Udith if he could ask her a question. Kiska asked if she had eaten the fruits he was planning to eat, but she shyly denied it. The hero explained that he couldn't eat the fruits, but Udith still insisted she didn't eat them. Changing the subject, she said it was time for bed. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought that this felt like a master-slave relationship. Afterward, he and she prepared to face the villain. Anger flared, and in a single sword stroke, he attacked. The training with Udith continued for several months, and his skills had improved along with his skill points. His swordsmanship skill had also leveled up. Kiska happily told Udith that his swordsmanship skill had leveled up, and the girl replied that at this rate, she believed the day they would escape the dungeon was getting closer. Kiska excitedly agreed. He clenched his fist confidently, saying, "I'll become strong enough to get you out of here." The girl chuckled shyly and said he was getting better at saying things like that. With a hand behind his head, the hero felt embarrassed. Then he said he was going to skin the monster, and she replied with an "okay." The girl said she would go ahead and return to the hideout. When Kiska finished his work, he raised his hand near the monster and summoned his sword right after. He thought that skinning the monster was the disciple's duty, and so he quickly finished the job. Returning to the hideout with the rest of the monster's body, he announced that he was back. However, he accidentally saw Udith when she wasn't wearing anything. Instantly, he panicked and dropped the bag on the ground. She hurriedly covered herself, but he was extremely flustered and embarrassed. The main character apologized and then hurriedly ran off. Suddenly, Udith called out after him, shouting. Kiska got worried, thinking she was angry. But she still wasn't dressed. She laughed and said his reaction was interesting. Teasingly, she added that she already knew this would happen. He sweat nervously, not knowing what to say. A while later, he finished making dinner, and finally finished his work for the day. The main character told Udith that he had done the dishes. Afterward, the girl headed for the bed with a sweet look in her eyes. She called Kiska's name, shy but unable to resist. She asked if Kiska wanted to sleep with her. He was shocked by the question, his face frozen in surprise. He asked why she would suddenly ask such a thing, and if there was a special reason. She shyly looked away, her cheeks blushing, and said there was no reason at all. But she didn't even believe her own words. She continued, saying that she just didn't want to sleep alone tonight. He was silent for a moment, then replied that if that's all it was, he would just sleep in his own room. However, she insisted. And though she was very embarrassed, she said that he was acting colder than usual. Kiska found her words really cute, and if he didn't do as she asked, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. So he said he understood, and that tonight they would sleep together. The girl smiled happily as she looked at Kiska. Udith lay down, and not long after, he lay down on the bed next to her. They both had silly grins on their faces, looking at each other happily. Looking at his face, she thought that if they were about to sleep together, then there was nothing wrong with saying these things. So she started the conversation, calling Kiska's name. He answered and looked at her, and she continued. It feels like it's been a long time since the day we met. He happily recalled the memory and nodded. You remembered that when you first met her, all you could think about was how terrifying she was. Now, here they were, sleeping together, and the feeling was strange to look back on. You called out Udith's name and asked, back then, did you want to kill me? She looked worried and replied, you could tell? Asking you back calmly. He looked up and smirked, and you felt certain she thought you could see right through her. But Kiska only knew this because she had killed him so many times before. Udith apologized. She explained, embarrassed, that the only people she'd ever met had tried to kill her the moment they saw her. That was why she was always on guard. Kiska replied that he wasn't like that, and that he didn't hate her even though she'd killed him many times. Whether she liked it or not, he was who he was because of her. For that, he was grateful and had no reason to resent her. She climbed on top of him, her face close to his, saying she was so relieved to hear he didn't hate her. Kiska felt embarrassed by her closeness as she held his face. She moved in closer and asked what he thought when he saw her naked. Kiska blushed and was at a loss for words. She smiled sweetly, telling him he could be honest with her. He admitted she was beautiful. Udith wasn't satisfied. The vampire asked him what else he thought. He repeated that she was very beautiful. The girl insisted further, so he added that she also looked cute. She said he must have thought of something else. Finally, Kiska admitted that she looked sexy. She embarrassedly called him a pervert. Kiska was mortified. He never expected her to call him that. The silver-haired boy insisted she shouldn't tease him like that. Udith found it funny and apologized. She adjusted herself and finally asked him. Kiska was startled by the question, his eyes getting lost in her gaze. In that moment, he couldn't help but think about the two important women in his life. After what happened with Namiya, he knew he had to hold back. But if he rejected her, could a tragedy like what happened with Agaya occur all over again? He sat up and called out to Udith, his voice full of sorrow. Udith had no idea what was going on. As she listened, her face filled with worry, wondering what had just happened. Kiska said that he didn't think his life was so bad right now. A smile returned to the vampire's face as she replied that she felt the same way. He continued, saying that it was terrifying. Confused, she asked why. He replied that it was because if he continued to live such a comfortable life, he was afraid his desire for revenge would vanish. When the bears were killing him over and over, he had cursed his fate. But now he was strong enough to defeat those monsters and even had a cute girl by his side. Kiska couldn't accept continuing to live like that. So he had called for Udith. He told her that he loved her, but he was sorry because he still wasn't ready. She lowered her head and said she understood, then gave him a passionate kiss. Kiska thought that he loved her, but to move forward, there were many things he needed to resolve first. Hopefully, she asked if he would continue their relationship after he got his revenge. He felt incredibly happy that she understood his side of things. Just as she was about to say something, a figure appeared behind her. Suddenly, Agaya appeared and decapitated her with a sword as her head fell. The vampire managed to say that she loved him. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Udith's heavy body collapsed onto him. The cold heroine asked why he couldn't choose her, yet could choose a girl like that. With a chilling gaze, she told him not to mess with her. The boy turned back time, and he hoped that she would remember him. When he met her at the end of the hallway, Kiska called out to her while she was drinking tea. She said that it was strange because she had never imagined an intruder could get so far. He felt disheartened, but had already guessed that she had forgotten him. However, he didn't lose hope, so he introduced himself as Kiska and asked if she remembered him. Perhaps his name would jog her memory. The vampire repeated his name, but unfortunately, she didn't remember anyone like him. The ground beneath his feet crumbled, leaving him in complete despair. A sense of uselessness washed over him, and he felt that he was about to lose his mind. He began to cry in desperation desperation, realizing he would have to do it all over again. Shocked by his reaction, Udith asked if the man was okay. He accepted what he had to do, as he had countless times before, his heart broken. Kiska knelt down and said that he had a request for her. The girl was surprised by his actions. Kiska firmly requested that she take him as her disciple, surprising the vampire with his request. Once again, he would have to become Udith's disciple, and they would need to escape this dungeon together. Even knowing that she might kill him again, he was still determined to return to the same place, as many times as it took. Suddenly, he looked at her face, and she was no longer there. Kiska had to suffer again. Seeing his woman dead, the girl, Agaya, reappeared and reminded him that she had warned him before. She lunged at the boy. She declared that if he got involved with another woman, she would not forgive him. She attacked, her sword piercing through Kiska's throat. Time reset again. He was exhausted and traumatized. He couldn't get close to Udith, and if he did, they would both be killed. The silver-haired boy remembered everything he had learned from Udith, the dungeon's structure and its secret paths, the location of the treasure chests, swordsmanship techniques, and how to control the parasitic sword. Perhaps their relationship was over, but the lessons she had taught him would always remain in his mind. He walked down the hallway once again, telling himself that he would escape this dungeon alone. In his mind, Kiska thanked Udith. He would use the wisdom and experience she had given him to escape this place. He approached the sword, his body tense. He grabbed the puppet's sword, holding it by the blade instead of the hilt. In a single motion, he swallowed the blade. The boy became paralyzed, and within him, the curse appeared once more. Kiska greeted it again, wondering why this kept repeating. It felt as if they had met before, as if he had said something similar the last time. Worried, Kiska asked the sword for help, pleading with it to lend him its power. The sword considered what it should do, but if this were like before, it would have agreed immediately. Kiska anxiously asked if there was a problem. The sword had its own goals and wanted to know if obeying the boy would help it achieve them. Confused, Kiska asked what kind of goals a monster could possibly have. The answer was simple: to become human. Kiska was surprised, since it lived by sucking human blood like a parasite, taking complete control. A human body would prevent it from doing that, so if it controlled his body, it wouldn't be able to become human. The shadow was unsure, as it had controlled many humans, but had never tried to become one of them. Surprisingly, obeying him might just bring it closer to its goal of becoming human. Terrified, Kiska asked if it would let him borrow its power. The shadow confirmed that he was correct. Kiska felt a rush of excitement, and the shadow said that for some reason obeying him felt like destiny. It would faithfully follow his every command. He had succeeded in controlling the puppet. The skill Lord of the Parasitic Sword has been learned, along with the sub-skill Black Sword. Now, with the sword in hand, and confident that he could fight once more, Kiska continued to press forward. His next objective was combat ability. He successfully acquired another swordsmanship skill, and set his sights on the next target, the Crystal of Wisdom. However, the chest containing it is right in front of the boss room, which means it will take some time to get there. Not to mention the danger. Last time he obtained the granite attribute, but had to wait for a chance to use it. Now, going there is pointless. The most important thing right now is his current strength. He only hunted monsters he could handle and honed his swordsmanship. Confident, he proceeded with his plan, and he ran towards his goal. Kiska entered the battle, and killed all his enemies. This way, he gained more skill points, enough to level up. He had cleared out everything, and it would take a while for them to respawn. In that case, he should head to the wolf's den now, but he can't because Udith got there first. They absolutely must not meet. The two of them aren't close in this life, so if she sees him, there's a chance he'll be killed. Even if they happen to get close, a negative spirit Eka might come and kill them. The entire dungeon belongs to Udith. The boy has to find a way to avoid Udith and continue hunting monsters. He was worried, not knowing what to do, when the sword spoke up, remarking that he seemed to be confused. The main character was startled, because he didn't know the puppet's sword could talk. The sword said it thought it would take longer to develop the ability to speak, but perhaps because the two of them are so compatible, the relationship between user and tool has enabled the puppet sword to speak. The sword asked with a worried tone what was troubling its master. Kiska replied that he wanted to gather more skill points and asked the sword if there was a way to do that. The sword warned that there were some opportunities ahead, but at his current level, he would only die. Even so, he decided to face them, and they headed for the Knight's Grand Hall. Before him were 3 soldiers in golden armor, and he knew they were stronger than the direwolves. When he saw that there were as many as 20 soldiers, Kiska remembered the black sword he was carrying. One of them rushed forward to attack him, but he successfully defended himself. The others also charged in, but he was still able to push them back with the sword's power. Feeling satisfied with the result, he remembered that the werewolves before didn't have weapons, but this time his enemies were heavily armed. Kiska took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and decided to face them. He taunted them, calling them weaklings. Some soldiers tried to attack him with their swords. Kiska ducked to avoid the blows, and the black sword remarked that it wasn't a bad move. He stood up and attacked 2 soldiers, confidently admitting that whether he liked it or not, He was very confident in group battles. He thought that although this tactic was very effective and the ideal way to farm skill points, fortunately it was also very effective at thinning out the enemy ranks. Kiska continued to call out to the soldiers again, urging them to face him in this battle. He was caught off guard by an attack from all sides. Multiple swords closed in on his body, the weapons beginning to wound him. And he realized this wasn't good. As he was being attacked, the boy realized he must have gotten carried away. The scene changed and suddenly he was alone. Kiska smiled and said he was back in this place again and felt a little nostalgic. First he was killed by werewolves, then those damn soldiers in golden armor. The boy realized he had died hundreds of times. At that moment, the boy rose with hope in his eyes. He understood that no matter how many times he died, he would always start over. Kiska pressed a brick on the wall, and the sword asked if its master knew about the secret passage. Kiska said that he didn't know much about it. He recalled the final moments of his battle with the gold-armored soldiers. He had tried to fight them again, and died again, just like all the other times. However, no matter how many times he died, he would always have to start over, right back at the beginning. Kiska never expected things to end up like this. He remembered the peaceful days when he lived with Udith. He approached the black sword. He gazed at it in awe and asked it to grant him all of its power. The black sword transformed into a strange form and revealed that it was an honor to meet its master. Kiska didn't understand what had just happened. The black figure asked if something was wrong. He replied that it was nothing. It was just that he noticed its form looked a little more human than he'd expected. The creature revealed that it didn't know it looked like this either. Lately, however, its form had been gradually changing. Kiska noticed that every time he looked at the black sword, it seemed more human. He thought that maybe he could escape this cycle of dying and starting over. Kiska asked if this was a good thing for the sword, since it dreamed of becoming human. The creature was startled. The sword asked him how he knew about its dream. They looked at each other in surprise. Kiska replied that he could understand someone's ambition just by looking into their eyes. The creature was astonished, and it revealed that it wanted to partner with Kiska, because he was a resilient person. Kiska suddenly noticed a change in the space around him. Circles appeared on the ground, and from them, warriors in golden armor emerged. Kiska faced them confidently as he had gone through countless trials. Though they might be the first to confront him now, he had died at their hands countless times before. No matter how strong they were, Kiska knew that in the end, he would be victorious. He declared that this time would be different. His blade could feel the powerful confidence radiating from him. The warriors prepared to attack, but Kiska was all too familiar with his enemies. He stood his ground, counting silently in his head. 1, 2, 3. When the countdown finished, he swiftly dodged an attack. Kiska noticed the friendly fire incident as the attacks accidentally hit the enemy's own allies. Instantly, he knew he had to keep dodging. The warriors continued their assault, and he quickly swung his sword up, executing a powerful downward slash. In doing so, he earned skill points. The black sword was amazed by its master's abilities. Kiska calmly stated that he had already figured out his opponent's strategy. However, while chatting with the talking sword, he suddenly realized the warriors had started aiming for his back. He turned and lowered his center of gravity, and with a swift strike, the boy wounded another enemy. Not even 2 were down yet. Kiska realized everything was going according to his plan. Kiska revealed that he could handle this. He beheaded another soldier. The boy realized that was the 4th one. A notification popped up, signaling that he had earned more points. Kiska looked at the screen and noticed that the SP stat of the monsters here was 10 times higher than in other places. They were on a completely different level. After facing 4 monsters, the main character had collected 416 SP. He leveled up his swordsmanship skill and the parasite master sword skill. The sword also gained the pulsing sword skill. Kiska encouraged his sword. Now they were both pleased with their new abilities. Kiska activated the sword's new function, making it grow larger and more powerful. Kiska felt a familiar weight in his hands and wondered why that was. Some of the guards continued to attack. They angrily charged at the boy. The sword seemed to merge with the main character's arm. Kiska let the sword's auto-function take over, taking down another guard. The guard fell, motionless. He then realized the sword's parasitic ability could actually fight in his place. The sword praised its master's combat skills, and he returned the compliment. The boy sent a guard's head flying, feeling that victory was within his grasp. But then he suddenly remembered the foolish reason he had died the last time. There are only a few guards left, the boy thought confidently. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. All the guards turned around and bowed to someone who had just walked in. Kiska dropped to his knees as the sword admitted it had failed to mention something, explaining that the man arriving on horseback was the master of this place. He's an SA class monster, and Kiska was terrified by what he saw. Kiska asked his sword if they even stood a chance of defending themselves. The sword replied that it all depended on its master and that its previous one had died. Despite his anxiety, Kiska insisted that things would go better for him than they did for the sword's previous master. The sword encouraged him, saying that their teamwork wasn't just for show. With his experience from countless battles using the puppet technique, Kiska wouldn't be easily defeated by any ordinary foe. He used his sword to parry an attack. Kiska realized the guards were still blocking the path, and he'd have to clear them all out in a single blow. He readied the puppet technique with his sword, and unleashed a flurry of strikes in every direction. In the blink of an eye, all the soldiers were dead. The black sword was astonished by its master's display. It noted that he'd done incredibly well, despite it being his first time using that technique. But Kiska knew he had used it before. Kiska heard the sound of hooves. He knew there was only one enemy left to kill. Only the knight remained. The enemy charged at Kiska with his lance. The boy used his sword as a shield. The force of the enemy's blow pushed Kiska back. He realized the knight was overwhelmingly powerful. He turned to his sword and asked if it could help him. The sword said it would try. Suddenly, the black sword shot upwards, pulling its master along with it. The first counterattack was launched. But the enemy counterattacks with his spear. Kiska tries to defend himself, and he raises his sword again to attack the soldier. Kiska realizes his opponent is skilled because he's struggling to deal any damage. At this rate, Kiska believes he might lose. Kiska attacks again, and he quickly defends himself. He manages to escape the situation with the help of the black sword. It reveals that he couldn't have dodged it, and that Kiska needed to use that technique. Kiska's loyal weapon warns him that it might kill him. Kiska gives a wry smile. He raises his sword and says he's used to death. Then he stabs his sword into the ground to build momentum and leaps up with the sword in his hand. Kiska thinks that if he can't damage the soldier because of the spear, he'll just have to destroy it. Kiska uses the puppet technique with his sword, creating a massive ring of attack. He aims straight for the guard's spear, and finally as he lands, he slices his opponent in two. The boy looks satisfied with his victory. He earns more skill points. The black sword praises its master and reveals that it can now reach level 3. With this information, Kiska opens his screen and realizes something. He has enough points to upgrade his sword, and he decides to use them to improve his weapon. The black sword senses the change happening. It transforms into a ferocious creature. Kiska is surprised by the sword's new form, but the creature seems pleased, saying this is what it had always been seeking. The boy wonders what it can do now that it's no longer a sword. It reveals that now it can eat. Without further explanation, it devours its master, and through that, it can finally become human. Kiska dies again and starts over from the beginning. He blames himself for the failure. He realizes he never noticed that the sword's ultimate goal was to defeat him. He begins to think, should you stop using your weapon? And Kiska wondered if he should try to take a sword from the enemies. However, he realized that this wouldn't work because he needed the sword's automatic functions. He felt something familiar about the sword's scent. Perhaps it was the compatibility between them. Kiska was furious for being betrayed by his own sword. Kiska suddenly stood up and started walking. He met a creature that could possibly become his sword. He believed that the creature also had its own plans. The black sword said that it was an honor to meet him. Then it asked to be evolved again, but Kiska refused. The sword desperately said that it would be much stronger at level 3, but Kiska replied, Kiska had understood the true purpose of his weapon. The black sword gave up on the idea, and it asked him how he knew everything. The boy wondered if the sword didn't intend to keep this secret for a while longer. Kiska thought he could just abandon the sword right now and take one that an enemy had left behind. The black sword called its master's name, but before he could answer, it brought itself close to his neck and asked if he really thought he was smarter than it was. He was scared because it seemed like the sword was using its automatic functions. The sword said that it would let its master choose. It asked if he wanted to die right now or be eaten by the beast later. Kiska knew that both options were terrible for him. He called the sword a puppet, and he demanded to negotiate. The weapon seemed to like this idea. Kiska said that it would be logical for him to die if the sword wanted to become human. The sword replied that in its view it would be better if he chose to be eaten by the beast. Kiska, in desperation, asked if it was really necessary for him to be eaten. The weapon replied that it didn't have to be that way, that any strong human could solve this problem. The sword asked curiously if its master could find a strong human for it. As soon as its master agreed, it returned to the ground, and the sword urged its master to hurry. Otherwise, he would be the one to be devoured. Kiska was still recovering from the shock. When he understood, he thought that logically, the person to be sacrificed had to be Agaya. He had no fond memories of her because she had killed him many times. If the protagonist catches her when the barrier is broken, he'll have a chance to kill her. On the other hand, Agaya was a hero who had saved the world. Even though she's the one who made Kiska suffer, she's the one the world needs. Udith will be the one who has to be sacrificed. Kiska couldn't accept that possibility. Even though their relationship was over, he still felt grateful to her. He remembered that Udith was also a very dangerous person who could attack if necessary. Kiska looked at the symbols on the ground and took another step forward. He remembered the hero who saved the world and the vampire who was feared by the people. Suddenly, a brilliant light enveloped him. He wondered which one of them would have to die. Inside a capsule, an Agaya appeared. And in that moment, Kiska knew she was the one who had to die. The black sword said there was a barrier that it couldn't be swallowed. Kiska was confident he could easily break through it, and his weapon demanded they act now. However, Kiska hesitated. He revealed that ever since he started saving people and restarting his life, he had lost all his self-respect. He no longer felt anything about his own death, so how was he supposed to feel about someone else's? Suddenly a worried look crossed his face. He didn't know if he could actually kill an Agaya. The black sword urged him to press on. Kiska thought there was still a chance Agaya could kill him in the future, so this was something he had to do. The boy started to feel nauseous. He felt the absolute worst doing this. Kiska remembered all the times Agaya had told him she loved him. He couldn't kill someone who said they loved him. Kiska cried, begging his weapon to cut off his head. He couldn't do it. The sword revealed there was no other way. It finally told him it would swallow him whole. Kiska was surprised. He asked if the weapon really wouldn't kill him. The sword asked if that's what he wanted. But in the end, the hero refused. The sword then said that upon seeing its master, it realized that his thoughts were just like a human's. The boy thanked his sword. The weapon told him to stop, because it was weird. Kiska would find a way to turn the sword into a person. His weapon seemed to like the idea. In a change of scene, the sword praised the place they were in. Kiska said they should rest for the remainder of the day, and together they had to decide how to proceed. The boy remembered that this place held terrible memories of Agaya's suicide, but also the happy time she had spent with Kiska. And since Udith had never used this place, it was best for both of them to rest. Kiska asked the sword if there was another way for it to become human, without having to devour the lives of others. The sword replied that there wasn't. Its master once thought it could become human by being a parasite and hunting monsters, and the sword thought so too. However, deep down, it knew it could only become human by destroying others. But to do that, it needed to reach level 3, and its previous masters had died before reaching that stage. The weapon explained that depending on others had become too dangerous, so it started acting as a parasite to control itself. Even so, it still hadn't reached the level of a true predator. Kiska was surprised by the sword's abilities. The black sword also admitted that even it was surprised, because no one had ever wielded it better than Kiska. Kiska felt delighted, and he understood that this was probably one of the reasons the sword let him survive. The black sword asked why its master was imprisoned in Katarov prison. The boy tried to remember and looked at the sword. He thought he would have to tell it everything. After the long story, the sword remarked that its master had been through a lot. Kiska said that no one in the village was on his side and that they still hated him to this day. His weapon suggested that it would devour everyone in the village. The boy was surprised by the idea. It would be his revenge and the sword stream. He held his sword, and Kiska cheerfully asked if it could devour all of them. The sword revealed that it would be very easy. Kiska held his sword with courage, believing that the two of them could do it. He told his weapon not to leave anyone behind. In that case, they would start the next day. The two ends of the dungeon, Kiska pointed his sword at a giant hawk. They would press forward until they escaped from there. With just a single strike, Kiska destroyed one of his enemies. The weapon was impressed by its master. Kiska revealed that not even S-rank bosses could compare to them. Now that they've come so far, the only remaining goal was the exit from the dungeon. Kiska headed towards the door, but suddenly Udith appeared before him. She was surprised not to see the sword in its usual place. Udith looked at Kiska with a sarcastic glint in her eyes and asked what was going on. Kiska was stunned to see her. While Udith raised her hand, her eyes filled with resentment, she began to activate her power, saying that Kiska was clearly carrying a dangerous weapon. A wave of power erupted from her hand, and the girl said she would kill anyone who possessed the parasitic sword. Kiska suddenly thought that this was bad. The black sword said it had detected the danger coming from her. Kiska knew that all too well. They were so close to escaping the dungeon. Kiska wondered if he really had to fight Udith, as she asked him if he was ready. Udith lunged at him, wielding 2 swords as she attacked. Kiska showed a pained expression. He dropped to his knees and begged her to wait a moment. Udith looked at him, confused. The sword wondered what its master was doing, confident that they could defeat her. Kiska quickly covered the sword's mouth, then told it to let him handle this situation. Then Kiska asked if she was the vampire Udith he'd heard so much about. The girl replied that at least he had some manners. Kiska bowed to her and asked if she would permit them to pass. Udith remarked that the sword he carried was very dangerous and must be destroyed to prevent future trouble. Kiska calmly replied that she didn't need to worry about that. Kiska revealed that he was in control of the sword and could command it. The vampire seemed surprised. She couldn't imagine anyone being able to control the sword. Kiska explained that someone had taught him how to do it, but he knew that it was Udith's own knowledge that had helped him achieve this. Hearing this, Udith remarked that he didn't seem to be lying and finally allowed them to pass. Kiska began to thank her. He felt relieved that he didn't have to confront her. As they walked past the vampire, the black sword spoke up, remarking that she was a very arrogant woman. Kiska grew worried about this, and he immediately reacted, defending against an attack from Udith. The girl said that the sword was disrespectful. Both Kiska and the sword were terrified of her model, and they started to run, with Kiska panting heavily. Kiska revealed that he had found a way out of the situation. The black sword couldn't stop laughing, finding what had just happened to be incredibly amusing. Still, in this situation, it was a good thing they escaped, since no one knew what might happen next. The sword asked if its master was angry, and Kiska replied that he was a little annoyed. The sword commented that they could have totally handled the girl. Kiska thought that might be true. She wasn't someone he wanted to go up against. The sword asked why, and Kiska tried to explain, but then he realized it wasn't something he could easily put into words. The sword remarked that Kiska must be into girls like her. Kiska quickly denied it, but the sword immediately noticed he was blushing. He stood up and told the sword to stop teasing him. The sword asked if they were leaving right away, and Kiska nodded. He confirmed that now they just needed to keep moving forward. He was certain that he would defeat the dungeon boss. They entered a hallway, and the black sword admitted this was its first time in a place like this. Kiska stopped in front of a chest, and the sword curiously asked what was inside. Kiska replied that inside was a wisdom crystal. Kiska opened the chest, hoping he would get a chance to harness the crystal's power. A powerful crystal appeared in the chest, and immediately a screen popped up announcing that the effect would activate automatically. The next screen indicated he had received a new ability, Appraisal. Kiska looked confused. He remembered this ability was on his list, but it was only D rank, which was practically useless. However, Kiska decided to try using his new ability, but it was locked because his level was too low. He opened the screen again and noticed he had enough points to upgrade his sword. Kiska was also going to upgrade his taunt and appraisal skills one more time. Kiska decided to try out his new ability. He raised his hand and summoned his new power, and suddenly, his black sword was sharper than ever. Kiska now understood. At this level, leveling up wasn't that important anymore. The sword asked him why he had been complaining earlier. Kiska explained that he tried using his new ability to appraise the sword, but only got useless information. The sword complained that he was admiring her beauty without permission. Kiska asked if she was a beautiful girl, and he told her to stop joking around. The sword swayed, and she replied that she would show him when she truly became a girl. Kiska felt curious. He didn't know what kind of person the sword would become when she turned human. He said he was ready now that the upgrade was complete. Kiska looked at the dungeon exit, then he confidently walked towards it. He stopped a few steps before the door, observing it seriously. The sword wondered if its master was nervous, and Kiska admitted that he did feel a little tense. The sword thought that she couldn't help him, but then Kiska heard a battle cry ring out from her, like a word of encouragement for her master. Kiska was startled and asked what happened. The sword replied that she was just cheering him on. Kiska laughed at the situation. The sword spoke up, saying he was making fun of her, but Kiska denied it. He smiled and thanked the sword. She asked about the sudden formality, and Kiska calmly replied that without her, he wouldn't have made it this far. The dungeon door opened, and Kiska stepped into a new hallway, with the door closing behind him. The sword told Kiska that he should save his gratitude for later, because the real challenge was just beginning. A creature approached Kiska, and he realized that the real battle had only just begun. The creature before him was a giant SS rank centipede. It lunged at him. Kiska immediately got into a fighting stance, simultaneously calling out the name of his new ability, Appraise. An information screen appeared stating that the centipede's venom could corrode even metal. Kiska grew anxious, realizing this would be a difficult battle. The centipede spread its jaws wide. The centipede shot venom at Kiska, but he managed to dodge it. The centipede's venom splattered against the wall. Kiska knew he would die if that attack hit him, so he activated his sword's vibration mode. The power of the black sword was unleashed. Now with the sword's autonomous power, Kiska could evade the venom. Kiska dodged one of the streams. Kiska pushed himself off and lapped up with his sword. This was his moment to strike. His sword slammed against the monster's shell. However, he couldn't understand why his sword couldn't cut through it. He kept striking with his powerful weapon, but was ultimately struck hard by the centipede. Kiska was slammed into a wall and could barely get back up before the monster could charge at him again. Just then, Kiska's sword helped him evade the attack. The monster attacked again, and the powerful blow sent Kiska flying to the ground. The black sword anxiously asked if its master was all right. Kiska got up. Though he wasn't fully recovered, he forced himself to stand. The sword asked what they should do next, and Kiska admitted that they couldn't keep dodging forever. Finally, the sword agreed they had no choice but to use that. Kiska lunged forward, using the puppet technique with his sword. Then he executed a spinning attack. Kiska prayed for the attack to work, but the blow was once again blocked by the centipede's thick shell. Kiska was taken by surprise. Kiska fell to the ground again. The giant centipede prepared to strike him again, and Kiska realized that none of his attacks were working against this powerful foe. The sword suggested that they move and search for the monster's weak point to attack. Kiska understood, and he let the sword's autonomous power lead the way. He wondered exactly where he should strike. However, his sword moved toward one of the creature's legs. Kiska tried to strike the creature's leg, but it was still no use. Kiska thought the creature's eyes might be its weak point and tried to pierce them, but was blocked by one of its claws. After pushing his sword back, the monster's claw also shoved Kiska and sent him flying. Kiska was badly injured. He thought it was no use this time. It was still too early to challenge the giant centipede. He considered silently accepting his death. Even after Kiska dies, time will just reverse itself. The centipede's claws drew closer to his face, but the sword moved on its own to protect its master. The sword suddenly stood up on its own. The sword asked why Kiska was giving up. The boy was too frightened to answer. But the sword reminded him of the promise he had sworn, to turn it into a human. Kiska suddenly remembered that it was true. Kiska got to his feet with the help of the talking sword. Even if he could turn back time, this sword wouldn't be the same as the one he would meet later. And the promise he made to the sword could only be fulfilled in this lifetime. Kiska apologized for making the sword worry. Then he immediately shifted into an attack stance, saying that now was the decisive moment. Kiska believed that the giant termite had to have a weak spot somewhere. And instantly, the sword moved using its own autonomous power. It angrily rushed toward one of the creature's legs, determined to attack. The giant termite opened its mouth, intending to swallow Kiska whole. But luckily, he managed to dodge in time. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. He immediately relayed his thoughts to the sword. He said that he might have found the creature's weakness. The sword encouraged him, but Kiska warned that to pull this off, they would both have to make a sacrifice. The sword accepted, understanding that it was necessary for the battle. Kiska smiled, and he thanked his companion. He immediately used his taunt ability, causing the injured termite to charge toward him. The giant termite's mouth opened wide again. The boy chanted the convoluted sword technique, Swift Dragon, and then Kiska charged into the creature's mouth. Kiska went inside its body, and he cut it with his sword. The centipede screamed in pain. Kiska knew that with a cut this deep, he could pierce right through its shell. Kiska encouraged his sword, and it agreed. With a powerful strike, Kiska tried to escape from the centipede. He left it heavily wounded as he landed on the ground. A screen displayed that he had killed the monster. After eliminating the termite, Kiska received a huge number of bonus points. He could hardly believe what he had just accomplished. The sword remarked that they should celebrate defeating the dungeon's final boss. But in that very moment, Kiska suddenly realized just how many hardships he had been through. He had faced countless trials, dangers that seemed insurmountable, but in the end, he had finally conquered the dungeon's most difficult stage.